Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. In today's classic bike review video, we are looking at Suzuki's 1980 through 1981 GS1100E, or GSX1100 as it's called in Europe. In 1980, Suzuki really rocked the motorcycling world with the GS1100E, and it featured a combination of straight line performance and handling not yet seen on a production motorcycle. According to Cycle World magazine, the 1980 GS1100E was the quickest and fastest production motorcycle that you could buy. It ran the quarter mile in the low 11-second range at around 120 miles an hour, and the top speed on the GS1100E was right around 140 miles an hour. So it was a very quick, very fast production motorcycle. New technology that debuted on the GS1100E was the twin swirl combustion chamber and 16 valve head, and that allowed more efficient cylinder filling and more efficient burn for the combustion cycle and more power consequently. Not only was the new 1100cc 16 valve motor more powerful than the 1000cc 8 valve motor that it replaced, it was also more fuel efficient, and it averaged right around 47 miles per gallon in stock trim. Power-wise, the GS1100E made right around 105 horsepower at the countershaft sprocket and 67 foot-pounds of torque. And just for reference, the 1980 CBX 6-cylinder from Honda made about 7 fewer horsepower and less torque than the GS1100E. Looking at the specs of the bike, the GS1100E weighed in right around 556 pounds with half a tank of fuel, so it was much lighter than the current liter bikes available. It featured an 1100cc 16 valve air-cooled engine, made it to a 5-speed transmission and chain final drive. The transmission in this bike was an excellent unit with very slick shifting. Looking at the front suspension on the bike, the GS1100E features a 4-way spring preload adjustment in the top of each fork leg. It also has an air adjustment, although the air pressure is designed to be set at 7.1 psi and really not to be varied from that. It also features 4-way damping adjustment. The amount of suspension adjustment on this bike allows you to set it up to ride either very plushly or very firmly for a more sporting ride. So it has a very wide range of adjustment that's available. Up front, the GS1100 featured dual disc brakes with big single piston calipers acting on those, and this particular example has steel braided brake lines already added, so that's a nice safety feature on a vintage bike. Out back, the GS1100E featured the traditional twin shock setup in the rear, and it had 5-way adjustable preload for the springs and 4-way adjustable damping on the rear shocks as well. It featured a box section aluminum swing arm out back. It also featured a large disc brake out back operated on by a single piston caliper. Frame-wise, the GS1100E features a steel tube cradle type frame. Carburation-wise, the GS1100E featured constant velocity type carbs, and those were a step up from the slide type carbs that were featured on previous big bore Suzukis. Instrumentation for the GS1100E was comprehensive. It was set up in its own dedicated housing, and it featured a large speedometer and a fuel gauge and a large tachometer that redlined at 9,000 RPM. It also featured a small display on the right-hand side with a motorcycle, and it would let you know if your headlight was out or your tail light or there were battery issues, or even if your side stand was down. So to me, that's kind of a cool styling point. Styling-wise, the GS1100E was a little bit controversial when it first came out. It looked a little bit futuristic, and I would say it's not as classically beautiful as like a Z1 Kawasaki, or even as visually impactful as a CBX. When I was younger, I thought the squared off headlight housing and the way it has this small fairing here looked a little bit goofy, and I wasn't a real fan of the tail section that looks a little bit like a lipstick tube. But over time, the styling has kind of grown on me, and now I think of it as being kind of 80s funky, and I really like it. Those of you who are familiar with the channel know that this is a recent purchase for me. This is a 1981 GS1100E with 9,000 miles, and I have a series of videos of what I've done to make this bike ready for road use. So you can view those on the channel as well. If you're like me and you enjoy classic bikes from the 70s and 80s, please like and subscribe. I feature lots of classic bike content on this channel. All right, enough talk. What is this classic superbike like to ride? I'm going to gear up, I'll bring the camera along, let's find out together. Let's ride.
I am currently riding Suzuki's 1981 GS1100E. The first thing I'm noticing on this GS1100 is the relatively compact size of it. This is the fourth GS1100 I have in the garage, and it honestly feels smaller than all of those. And in fact, it feels smaller than the 1982 GS750E that I previously had. The ride on this Suzuki is very nice. It is just soaking up the bumps. In addition, it feels very nimble and very confidence-inspiring in the handling. This has such nice mid-range, you just don't have to push it to accelerate quickly. And one of the things I love about these bikes is that you don't have to wind them out to really hustle them on the back road. And so you can drive them very briskly and it still feels like a relaxed pace. Doesn't feel like it's wound tight all the time just to get some performance out of it. I'm getting a little bit of engine vibration through the bars, and at certain RPM I can feel it maybe a little bit through the seat. But overall, this is a very smooth ride. I've just installed new brake pads on this bike, and they are bedding in. So the braking performance isn't optimal yet, but it's still much better than it was. This bike is running a lower, narrower bar than the stock US bar, but I really like the stability that it offers. I like the little bit of lean into the wind. This bike is not shifting intensive to drive. You can leave it in top gear anywhere from 40 miles an hour on up, and it just pulls very nicely and very cleanly. The seating position on this bike is very comfortable for me. It's roomy. It's got a nice seat on it that is literally all day comfortable. The clutch pull on this bike is light. The braking action is nice. It's predictable. It's linear. And it's well matched to the rest of the bike as far as the power output and the suspension goes. I wouldn't call the handling particularly quick, but I would say it's very confidence-inspiring. I'm running Avon tires on this bike, and they handle very nicely, very predictably. I've not done any suspension tuning yet on this bike, but the suspension currently is set up kind of in that Goldilocks zone where it offers a very plush ride, and it's still relatively well controlled in the corners. And so I'll check it out and see what it is and maybe make a few minor tweaks, but it's set up pretty nicely already. At 60 miles an hour on this bike, I'm revving right around 3,800 RPM. The transmission in this bike is a very slick shifting 5-speed transmission. It goes up through the gears very nicely, very positively. And in my book, these Suzuki transmissions from the GS series of bikes were among the best in the world. And they compare favorably even today with the other bikes on the market. It's still a great unit, so smooth and precise, and you're just not prone to miss many shifts with them. What makes this bike so nice is the accessibility of the performance on it. It's a bike that a novice could get on and it wouldn't really necessarily intimidate them, but it's a bike with so much performance on tap, and you can drive it slow if you want to, or you can really open it up, and it's so rewarding and so obliging really in any way you ride it. That's nice. As nice as these 1100s pulled down low, you can really feel the effect of the twin swirl combustion chamber. Once you get it up above 6,000 RPM, it really becomes ferocious in the acceleration. Now, because it's a cold day and a blustery day and there's a lot of debris on the road, I am not hammering this in a straight line, so trust me when I say this has ample power on tap, and the higher you rev it, the harder it pulls. Very nice.
All right, man, what a lot of fun. Man, my first impression on riding this bike is how easy it is to ride and how easy it is to ride quickly. Yesterday, I rode my XS1100 Yamaha for about 40 miles, and I really enjoy that bike, and it has such smooth power and such nice mid-range to it. And the only downside of that bike is it's a little bit heavy handling in the corners. And so when I got on this bike, it has that nice ride, it has that smooth comfort, and it has that great mid-range power, but this is so light and nimble in the corners. The handling is a very nice combination of stability and ease of use in the corners, It is very confidence inspiring. And what I love about this Suzuki is the combination of the ease of use, the comfort, the smoothness of it, and the very high level of capability, even in sporting terms. And it's so easy to see why this GS1100 Suzuki was the best superbike of the time. Although this bike has not really gone up in value like Honda's 6-cylinder CBX, this is really the bike that deposed the CBX as the king of the superbikes. This bike was a little bit quicker through the quarter mile, it handled better, and it performed better as a motorcycle. And the wonderful thing about this bike is its robust simplicity, and especially when you compare it to the CBX, this bike was just much easier to maintain, much easier to live with, and a better overall package. It never had the sex appeal of that big 6-cylinder. It also did not have just the visual appeal of the CBX. I'm not knocking the CBX. It is a gorgeous bike and a technological wonder. But for an everyday superbike, it is hard to beat Suzuki's GS and GSX line of motorcycles. All right, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. And until next time, enjoy the ride.